The snoring stopped, and Foyle rose. "That ought to hold them for today," he muttered, and went into his dressing room. He stood before a mirror, took a deep breath, and held it, meanwhile, watching his face. At the expiration of 1 minute, it was still untainted. He continued to hold his breath, maintaining rigid control over pulse and muscle, mastering the strain with iron calm. At 2 minutes and 20 seconds, the stigmata appeared, blood red. Foyle let out his breath. The tiger mask faded. "Better," he murmured. "Much better. The old fakir was right. Yoga is the answer. Control, pulse, breath, bowels, brain." He stripped and examined his body. He was in magnificent condition, but his skin still showed delicate silver seams in a network from neck to ankles. It looked as though someone had carved an outline of the nervous system into Foyle's flesh. The silver seams were the scars of an operation that had not yet faded. That operation had cost Foyle a credit 200,000 bribe to the chief surgeon of the Mars Commando Brigade and had transformed him into an extraordinary fighting machine. Every nerve plexus had been rewired, microscopic transistors and transformers had been buried in muscle and bone. A minute platinum outlet showed at the base of his spine. To this Foyle affixed a power pack the size of a pea and switched it on. His body began an internal electronic vibration that was almost mechanical. "More machine than man," he thought. He dressed, rejected the extravagant apparel of 4 Mile of Ceres for the anonymous black coverall of action. He jaunted to Robin Winsberry's apartment in the lonely building amidst the Wisconsin pines. It was the real reason for the advent of the 4 Mile Circus in Green Bay. He jaunted and arrived in darkness and empty space and immediately plummeted down. "Wrong coordinates," he thought. "This jaunt?" The broken end of a rafter dealt him a bruising elbow, and he landed heavily on the shattered floor upon the putrefying remains of a corpse. Foyle leapt up in calm revulsion. He pressed hard with his tongue against his right upper first molar. The operation that had transformed half his body into an electronic machine had located the control switchboard in his teeth. Foyle pressed a tooth with his tongue, and the peripheral cells of his retina were excited into emitting a soft light. He looked down 2 pale beams at the corpse of a man. The corpse lay in the apartment below Robin Winsberry's flat. It was gutted. Foyle looked up. Above him was a 10-foot hole where the floor of Robin's living room had been. The entire building stank of fire, smoke, and rot. "Jacked," Foyle said softly. "This place has been jacked. What happened?" The jaunting age had crystallized the hobos, tramps, and vagabonds of the world into a new class. They followed the night from east to west, always in darkness, always in search of loot, the leavings of disaster carrion. If earthquake shattered a warehouse, they were jaunting it the following night. If fire opened a house or explosion split the defenses of a shop, they jaunted in and scavenged. They called themselves jack-jaunters. They were jackals. Foyle climbed up through the wreckage to the corridor on the floor above. The jack-jaunters had camped there. A whole calf roasted before a fire, which sparked up the sky through a rent in the roof. There were a dozen men and 3 women around the fire, rough, dangerous, jabbering in the Cockney rhyming slang of the jackals. They were dressed in mismatched colors and drinking potato beer from champagne glasses. An ominous growl of anger and terror met Foyle's appearance as the big man in black came up through the rubble, his intent eyes emitting pale beams of light. Calmly, he strode through the rising mob to the entrance of Robin Winsberry's flat. His iron control gave him an air of detachment. "If she's dead," he thought, "I'm finished. I've got to use her, but if she's dead—" Robin's apartment was gutted like the rest of the building. The living room was an oval of floor around the jagged hole in the center. Foyle searched for a body. 2 men and a woman were in the bed in the bedroom. The men cursed. The woman shrieked at the apparition. The men hurled themselves at Foyle. He backed a step and pressed his tongue against his upper incisors. Neural circuits buzzed, and every sense and response in his body was accelerated by a factor of 5. The effect was an instantaneous reduction of the external world to extreme slow motion. Sound became a deep garble. Color shifted down the spectrum to the red. The 2 assailants seemed to float toward him with dreamlike languor. To the rest of the world, Foyle became a blur of action. He sidestepped the blow, inching toward him, walked around the man, raised him, and threw him toward the crater in the living room. He threw the second man after the first jackal. To Foyle's accelerated senses, their bodies seemed to drift slowly, still in mid-stride, fists inching forward, open mouths emitting heavy, clotted sounds. Foyle whipped to the woman cowering in the bed. "Rithbleh," the blur said. The woman shrieked. Foyle pressed his upper incisors again, cutting off the acceleration. The external world shook itself out of slow motion, back to normal. Sound and color leaped up the spectrum, and the two jackals disappeared through the crater and crashed into the apartment below. "Was there a body?" Foyle repeated gently. "A Negro girl." The woman was unintelligible. He took her by the hair and shook her, then hurled her through the crater in the living room floor. His search for a clue to Robin's fate was interrupted by the mob from the hall. They carried torches and makeshift weapons. The Jack Jaunted were not professional killers. They only worried defenseless prey to death. "Don't bother me," Foyle warned quietly, ferreting intently through closets and under overturned furniture. They edged closer, goaded by a ruffian in a mink suit and a tri-cornered hat, and inspired by the curses percolating up from the floor below. The man in the tricorn threw a torch at Foyle. It burned him. Foyle accelerated again, and the Jack Jaunters were transformed into living statues. Foyle picked up half a chair and calmly clubbed the slow-motion figures. They remained upright. He thrust the man in the tricorn down on the floor and knelt on him. Then he decelerated. Again the external world came to life. The jackals dropped in their tracks, poleaxed. The man in the tricorn hat and mink suit roared. "Was there a body here?" Foyle asked. "Negro girl, very tall, very beautiful." The man writhed and attempted to gouge Foyle's eyes. "You keep track of bodies?" Foyle said gently. "Some of you jacks like dead girls better than live ones. Did you find her body in here?" Receiving no satisfactory answer, he picked up a torch and set fire to the mink suit. He followed the Jack Jaunted into the living room and watched him with detached interest. The man howled, toppled over the edge of the crater, and flamed down into the darkness below. "Was there a body?" Foyle called down gently. He shook his head at the answer. "Not very deft," he murmured. "I've got to learn how to extract information. Dagenham could teach me a thing or two." He switched off his electronic system and jaunted. He appeared in Green Bay, smelling so abominably of singed hair and scorched skin that he entered the local pristine shop, Jewels, Perfumes, Cosmetics, Ionics, and Surrogates, to buy a deodorant. But the local Mr. Presto had evidently witnessed the arrival of the 4 Mile Circus and recognized him. Foyle at once awoke from his detached intensity and became the outlandish 4 Mile of Ceres. He clowned and cavorted, bought a 12-ounce flagon of Eau No. 5 at 100 credits the ounce, dabbed himself delicately, and tossed the bottle into the street to the edification and delight of Mr. Presto. The record clerk at the county record office was unaware of Foyle's identity and was obdurate and uncompromising. "No, sir, county records are not viewed without proper court order for sufficient cause. That must be final." Foyle examined him keenly, without rancor. "Asthenetic type," he decided. "Slender, long-boned, no strength. Elliptoid character, self-centered, pedantic, single-minded, shallow. Not bribable, too repressed and straight-laced. But repression's the chink of his armor." An hour later, 6 followers from the 4 Mile Circus waylaid the record clerk. They were of the female persuasion and richly endowed with vice. 2 hours later, the record clerk, dazed by flesh and the devil, delivered up his information. The apartment building had been opened to Jack Jaunting by a gas explosion 2 weeks earlier. All tenants had been forced to move. Robin Winsbury was in protective confinement in Mercy Hospital near the Iron Mountain Proving Grounds. Protective confinement? Foyle wondered. What for? What's she done? It took 30 minutes to organize a Christmas party in the 4 Mile Circus. It was made up of musicians, singers, actors, and rabble who knew the Iron Mountain coordinates. Led by their chief buffoon, they jaunted up with music, fireworks, fire, water, and gifts. They paraded through the town, spreading largesse and laughter. They blundered into the radar field of the Proving Ground protection system and were driven out with laughter. 4 Mile of Ceres, dressed as Santa Claus, scattering banknotes from a huge stack over his shoulder, and leaping in agony as the induction field of the protection system burned his bottom, made an entrancing spectacle. They burst into Mercy Hospital, following Santa Claus, who roared and cavorted with the detached calm of a solemn elephant. He kissed the nurses, made drunk the attendants, pestered the patients with gifts, littered the corridors with money, and abruptly disappeared when the happy riding reached such heights that the police had to be called. Much later, it was discovered that a patient had disappeared too, despite the fact that she had been under sedation and was incapable of jaunting. As a matter of fact, she departed from the hospital inside Santa's sack.